Hi, my name's Anna Gibbons, and for my book, I chose Lost Moon, about the disastrous mission of Apollo 13, written by Jim Lovell. Jim Lovell was the commander of the Apollo 13 mission. He flew a total of 4 missions for NASA before retiring. I chose this book because the Apollo 13 mission has always interested me, and I wanted to learn more about it.
Hi, my name is Sarah Thompson. I read 5 Days at Memorial by Sherry Fink, an investigative journalist. The book is about the disaster of Hurricane Katrina and Memorial Hospital dealing with all of the people coming in for shelter, refuge, and treatment. I picked this book because I myself aspire to be an EMT for the county and wanted to know what a large-scale event such as Katrina would be like to handle.
Hi, my name is Emma Hopp, and I read The Six by Laura Thompson, who is a writer and journalist. The Six is about the Mitford family, specifically the 6 daughters, who are also known as the Mitford sisters. These sisters were icons of the 1930s and 40s in Europe and fascinated a lot of people. I chose this book because I've always been interested in influential historical figures, and the Mitfords are a great example of this, especially since there are 6 of them, and they all held their own influence in their own way.
Lost Moon is written in chronological order. The book focuses on the 6 days of the mission from launch to landing and all of the problems in between.
Like Anna's book, 5 Days at Memorial is divided into 2 parts chronologically, the first part being from August 28th to September 1st during Katrina and immediately after, and it talks about the treatment given to the patients by the doctors, and the second part, called The Reckoning, deals with what happens after and all the repercussions that the doctors faced, because as you'll see later, they were not always making the most morally sound decisions on how to treat their patients.
The Six is divided into 4 parts, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. Parts 1 and 2 deal mainly with their childhood into adulthood, and part 3 really deals with their political views, and then part 4 goes about their deaths.
All 3 of our authors make an argument about some sort of high-stress situation.
For example, in Lost Moon, my author's high-stress situation comes in the form of being 200,000 miles away from home when disaster strikes in the form of a mysterious explosion, and soon oxygen and power begin slipping away. His claim about high-stress situations is that there's always a way out. Immediately, the crew on board and at home start troubleshooting the problem.
My book takes place in the 1930s and 40s, and this time was a very dangerous era politically, especially with World War II going on, and this era was definitely high stress with so many different views such as fascism, Nazism, and communism and democracy, and my author makes the claim that in this situation that people should turn to celebrities and icons such as the Mitford sisters. And the thing about the Mitford sisters is they brought together all these different views into one package because, one sister was a fascist, and one was a Nazi, and one was a communist, and it's part of the reason why they were so popular.
Fink tells the story of how Memorial Hospital loses all power, backup generators, and any ability to operate life-sustaining apparatuses used to treat patients. Fink argues that in these situations, the only thing that truly matters is protecting human life no matter what the cost. Doctors and nurses throughout the hospital are forced with making the hard decisions of who to keep alive and who to let go. These situations can be detrimental to the morality of the hospital and shows the effects of what happens.
In Emma's book and in my book, our authors use all 3 forms of appeals. Lovell establishes his ethos from the very beginning of the book due to the fact that he was an astronaut on board the Apollo 13 mission. He builds pathos by talking about his wife and his 3 kids and their reaction to Apollo's failing mission. Lastly, he forms logos by explaining the science behind the mechanical problems in the rocket.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how Anna's book and my book talk about 2 vastly different topics, but yet they use the same forms of appeals to convey different arguments. In terms of pathos, Thompson uses powerful language to describe the Mitford sisters, calling them a, quote, social experiment, and saying that, quote, never again will there be such 6 girls raised in such a way at such a time. In terms of logos, the Mitford sisters wrote numerous letters to each other, and Thompson really utilizes these letters to convey her argument, and this also establishes her credibility or ethos, because she is knowledgeable of even the most personal things about the Mitford sisters, such as their letters.
My book differs from Anna and Emma's because it only has logos and pathos. An example of the logos and pathos combined in this book is the character of Dr. Anna Powell. One of the first scenes of the book is doctors and nurses, including Dr. Powell, administering life-ending doses of drugs to patients who they felt would not survive the coming days at the hospital after all of the doctors had been evacuated from the hospital. Dr. Powell describes this as being one of the hardest decisions she has ever had to make, but the only moral thing that she could do. This displays logos due to the factual evidence provided in the book as to why all the doctors were led to making such a rash decision. This is pathos because as I read this book, I felt sorry for both Dr. Powell and the patient she let go. This is a decision that I would never want to make by myself. Which leads me to my question of how do doctors make such hard decisions on a daily basis like that? Going through the rest of the book and just through my personal experience as an EMT, I've kind of found the answer, as in when you're making those medical decisions, it's muscle memory. It's very quick to judge, snap judgments, and making those decisions, and then you deal with the repercussions of them later. And I feel like when it applied to a situation like Katrina, it was kind of the same way, as in, like the author was arguing, all they were worried about was making the patients comfortable and making it so that they were going to be okay in this life or the next.
That's an interesting question, Sarah. I feel like my question of how do you stay calm in a life or death situation is kind of similar. And I really liked your answer of it being a muscle memory thing. And I feel like in life or death situations, it's similar where you do what has to be done and you're reminding yourself that worrying won't help in the long run.
Well, my question really doesn't have to do with high stress, but high stress is really part of the answer. So my question was, what made the Mitfords so popular and influential? And I think one thing to note is just the fact that the 1930s and 40s were just so stressful of a time, and people really needed other people to turn to, and I think the Mitfords provided that. Other factors that I think made them so popular and influential is just their charm, because, I mean, they were all really beautiful sisters, and their class, and they were all really wealthy, and also their self-confidence. The Mitford sisters really didn't care what others thought of them. They went out into the world with their opinions and didn't care if they were challenged or if people thought that they were wrong. Speaking of class and self-confidence, this leads me into my connections. I think this book connects to The Great Gatsby because in The Great Gatsby, the 1920s society idolizes wealthy figures such as Gatsby. And the Mitfords were much like Gatsby because they were both icons of Europe because of their wealth. And like Gatsby, the Mitford sisters drew attention to themselves, but not through parties, but because of their vast political views. This made them interesting to a variety of people. This also connects to Brain on Fire between the idea of truth, because this is dealt with a lot with the Mitfords. They often messed with and exaggerated with the truth in their storytelling. And much like Kahan not knowing what was real and true, Thompson actually mentions that in the making of her book, it was hard because truth and lives were, quote, multiplied and magnified within the charm circle of the Mitford sisters.
Like Emma, my book also relates to Brain on Fire because of the shortcomings of the medical industry. When Memorial Hospital shut down, doctors panicked. Instead of thinking of rational ways to treat patients, they took shortcuts to get patients discharged and ignored more minor issues that patients had and claimed they didn't have the resources to treat them, when in some cases they did. In the end of the first part of the book, a family gets turned away from the hospital because nurses said that there was no more room in the hospital for refugees when they did have room. The owners of the hospitals didn't even send helicopters to evacuate the hospital until the third and fourth days of the crisis. This was all in horrible medical form and exposed that hospitals, instead of treating patients, were being run like businesses. Much like the one that Susanna Collins was admitted to when she was diagnosed with brain encephalitis.
It's funny how all three of our books relate to Brain on Fire in different ways. My book relates to Brain on Fire in the sense of recognizing a problem and trying to figure out what's going wrong, how it started, and how to fix it. It's also interesting how all three of our books are about history. The Apollo 13 mission was such a huge event in the realm of space exploration and has forever changed the way Americans view space travel.
The Disaster Memorial Hospital is only one of the failing hospitals that led to the collapse of one of America's most treasured cities. FEMA became a national superpower after New Orleans, and the call for the better response programs was answered.
My book, though historical, connects to events today. The 1930s and 40s had lots of political tension, and I think this resonates today in American politics. Like then, politics are very polar and extreme, and both sides are vastly different, especially in this past election. Politics caused a lot of tension as it did back then. Also, another connection is the idea of icons during a wartime. The Mitford sisters were an icon of World War II, and so was Rosie the Riveter. In World War I, Uncle Sam was a popular icon. When people think of the Revolutionary War, they think of George Washington. All of these people are associated with these wars and eras and helped shape the perception of these wars.
Thanks for listening.